Listen. The world is talking. World Talk Radio, Studio A.
This is Civil War Talk Radio with Jerry Prokopowicz. The Great Locomotive Chase is one of the most well-known and dramatic stories of the Civil War. A daring band of Union soldiers and a few civilians boldly attempted to steal a Confederate train, drive it through the heart of the Confederacy, burning bridges and tearing up tracks as they went, to cripple the Southern transportation network. It almost succeeded. What actually happened is the subject of today's book, Stealing the General, and our guest, its author, Russell S. Bonds. Join us to hear about the locomotive chase on Civil War Talk Radio.
Everyone faces conflict. At home, at work, in the community, in the world. Fix Your Conflicts is a show about how to fix those conflicts with practical tips and techniques. Doug Knoll brings to the internet airwaves the first of its kind, a show that teaches peaceful resolution to life's daily battles. That's Fix Your Conflicts with Doug Knoll, broadcasting live every Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific on World Talk Radio, Studio A.
Answer the President's call to service.
As an AmeriCorps member, I know that Americans everywhere are helping each other, showing strength of character.
As a senior Corps volunteer, I know that Americans are showing kindness and compassion.
As an AmeriCorps member, I see plenty of American spirit and enthusiasm.
Together, we make America strong.
Together, we make America great.
Find out how you can serve at nationalservice.org.
It's your world. It's your chance to make it better.
Apply online at nationalservice.org.
Listen. The world is talking. World Talk Radio, Studio A.
Welcome to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopowicz, coming to you from the campus of East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. It's the beginning of a new academic year in 2008, the beginning of a new football season for the Pirates here at East Carolina, and the beginning of a new season, the fifth season of Civil War Talk Radio. Welcome back, listeners. It's good to be back doing the show live once again, and looking forward to getting your comments by email or otherwise as the season goes on. Let me know if there are any people you'd like to hear, books you'd like to hear about, subjects you'd like to hear discussed. That's always welcome. We have some really interesting guests lined up for the season, names most listeners will recognize, people like Peter Cozzens, Noah Andre Trudeau, Ed Ayers, George Rabel. It promises to be an excellent year of discussion of Civil War topics here on Civil War Talk Radio. And we have new phones here at East Carolina University. The taxpayers of the state have ponied up to replace the legacy phone system here in the Brewster Building, for which parts had not been made, I think, since 1974. And after all the cannibalization that they could possibly do was done with, they finally got rid of those phones and put in new ones, which have all kinds of fabulous new technology, new buttons to push, 50 different ringtones that we can select from. The drawback to that is the ringtones were selected by the IT department, and I thought Monty Python was hysterical when I was in high school, and it still holds up in many ways. But 7 Monty Python ringtones to choose from out of 50 is just too many. I think they might have done a little better with that, and none of them relate to the Civil War, I should point out. But enough about the phones. Hopefully, the phone sound quality is good. We'll talk to our engineer, Anthony, about that later today, hopefully, and make sure you can hear everything. But as to what to hear, it's time, again, to resume the show. One more housekeeping note before we start is hopefully before this season of the show ends, we'll be able to get an auxiliary Civil War Talk Radio website up somewhere that will have background information on the shows and other things that you can't see on the current website where you can hear the show. still working on that, no promises. One advantage is we could reinstate the PayPal donation button. If you are so moved to contribute to the show, the address is civilwartr@aol.com. It's not tax deductible. I can use the money to buy bourbon if I so choose, but it will go toward either purchasing books for the show or for website fees if we get that alternate website going. So civilwartr@aol.com is the PayPal address for those who wish to help support Civil War Talk Radio. Our guest today, a new author to the Civil War world, is Russell S. Bonds. Mr. Bonds, are you there?
I am, Jerry. How do I sound on the new phones?
You sound fabulous. Wonderful. May I call you Russ?
Please do.
Russell? Does that work for you?
Please call me Russ.
It's good to talk with you. We exchanged a few voicemails with the fabulous new phones. The old phones did not allow voicemail. You could leave a voicemail, but it would only show up hours, sometimes days after it was left, which was not very professional. But now we're in good shape here. Russ, you, according to the back of the book, have a day job at the Coca-Cola Company. Is that correct?
That's true, and just as you issue disclaimers, I should probably issue one as well, that of course this is an after-hours venture for me, working on the book and other projects.
So if I were to ask about the Andrews Raiders, for example, would they have preferred Pepsi or Coke, you would just give a pure historian's answer, not one based on your employer's wish.
Absolutely.
Okay. I won't ask that question, though.
Okay, fair enough.
I am actually here in Pepsi country, invented in New Bern, just down the road from Greenville. I personally prefer the astringent petrochemical taste of Diet Coke to all other beverages, but around here, Pepsi seems to dominate.
Diet Coke, nectar of the gods.
There's something about it. It's like no natural flavor, but I'm looking at a Diet Pepsi on my table right here in front of me because that's what the student store has, and I can barely choke it down. Well, you practice law, I understand.
That's correct. I'm in the legal department here. I've been here for 6 years now.
And I mentioned that because I practiced law before I became a historian, and I heard a lecture this morning from a historian speaking to one of my classes who talked about how frequently he would encounter at parties a lawyer or doctor who would just be green with envy. Oh, if only I could be a historian too, because we have so much more fun. We just make less money, but we do have more fun. How did you choose between law and history, or what interest do you have in history between that would lead you to write a book in your after hours?
Well, my background educationally is actually more of a technical background. I went to Georgia Tech, right across the street from me here, studied architecture, and as I went along, the courses that I enjoyed the most were the architecture history courses. And by my senior year of college, was thinking more about law school. And after I got out of law school and began practicing, history sort of returned for me as a hobby, and did more and more reading on it, and eventually started to write a little bit. And this particular project came up for me as I was looking for a history to read about the Andrews Raid, which was a story that I was familiar with from growing up here in North Georgia. And I went to the library, went to the bookstores, and couldn't find anything. So I started pulling together materials, and before I knew it, I was working on a book of my own.
I would imagine most people first learned about the Andrews Raid or the Great Locomotive Chase from the Disney movie of the same name, which I don't know that I've ever seen. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, a lot of people do come to this story through the movies. There was actually a silent movie in the 1920s, a Buster Keaton film called The General, widely considered by critics one of the top comedies of all time, and interestingly praised by Orson Welles as the Civil War movie, by the way. He considered it head and shoulders above Gone with the Wind, for example. But then later in the 1950s, Walt Disney, who was a huge train and railroad buff, became interested in the story and brought it to the big screen as The Great Locomotive Chase, starring Fess Parker. And I should say that when I travel around and talk about the book, I have a lot of people of a wide range of ages who tell me that they grew up watching that movie. I think it's not only folks who were kids in the 50s, but also those who watched the movie sort of rerunning on The Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights, which is where I first saw it in the 70s.
You mentioned that Disney was a train buff, and I imagine the story must appeal to people with a train interest. Do you get, when you talk about your book, do you get a mix of Civil War buffs and train buffs in the same audience?
I do, and one of the appeals of the story for me is I felt like it had some appeal beyond the Civil War area, had crossed over into the railroad area, and then, of course, had this sort of enduring legacy of the Medal of Honor. The first award of the Congressional Medal of Honor was given to participants in the Andrews Raid. And so, it sort of crossed a number of different areas of history that I found very interesting. I do get questions and interest from what I'll call the sort of the rivet counting railroaders, which is not my particular expertise, although I did my best to do my homework and get the details right in the book.
I can imagine the sort of intersection of geekiness between intense train people and intense Civil War people, could reach a critical mass at one of these meetings.
I think that's right. I tell my wife that I do have book groupies, but they're all, 65-year-old men who like to play with trains. So,
yeah. Well, you're among friends here then.
Very good.
Audience, I'm sure. Let's talk about the raid itself and sort of lay it out. I imagine most listeners certainly have heard of the raid and have some outline of it, but you certainly go into more detail and tell the story more thoroughly than it has been told ever before. And let's start at the beginning. What's the strategic context of this? What makes this anything we should pay attention to other than a dramatic story? Does it have any actual strategic meaning?
Well, it does, and in a way, it's to me sort of a foreshadowing of the importance of the Western and Atlantic Railroad and the role it would play in the Atlanta campaign 2 years later. But this was a time, early spring 1862. A lot of uncertainty in the war. Things had not gone very well for the Union to that point. There was a sense that the Union armies were stalled east and west, and Abraham Lincoln was particularly interested in East Tennessee and Chattanooga. At one point, he would say during the war that Chattanooga is as important as Richmond, and I describe it in the book as if the theater is a tic-tac-toe board, then Chattanooga is sort of center square, and possession of Chattanooga can block rail transport across and down. So the idea of the Andrews Raid in early 1862 is an effort to cut the rail connection between Atlanta and Chattanooga, the Western and Atlantic Railroad, and isolate the city of Chattanooga, which was very thinly defended by the Confederates at that point. And offer an opportunity for the Union to gain control of Chattanooga, almost 2 years earlier than that would happen as things would play out. So if you think about it as a way to accelerate the timetable and potentially open the door to the Deep South much earlier in the war than would have happened otherwise.
Now, the Union commanding officer, not of the raid itself, not Andrews, but of the Union forces in Tennessee at that time was General Ormsby Mitchell, and he is quite a character. Tell us something about him.
Right, Mitchell commanded the 3rd Division in the Army of the Ohio. I know you're a little familiar with that force.
I've come across it, yes.
And Mitchell had about 10,000 men in Middle Tennessee, and was sort of chafing under the hand of his superior officer, Don Carlos Buell, who he regarded as very slow. And Mitchell was a very ambitious character, wanting to make his mark. You're right, he is a very interesting fellow. He was the leading astronomer in the United States before the war, sort of the Carl Sagan of his day, lectured widely on astronomy and other topics, and also had served as chief engineer of 2 different railroad companies. So he was aware of the importance of the East-West Railroad from Corinth to Chattanooga, the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, that was called, and then the Western and Atlantic, which met in Chattanooga. So his plan was to march south towards Huntsville, Alabama, and break the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, and then make a left turn and head towards Chattanooga. Right on cue, in a way, a Kentucky spy by the name of James Andrews showed up in Mitchell's camp and proposed this plan to take a couple of dozen volunteers with him deep behind Confederate lines into Georgia, steal a train, and then break that railroad line to cut off Chattanooga and sort of leave the door wide open for Mitchell to come marching in. That was the way it was supposed to work, anyhow.
In the context of this era, it's not a crazy plan. As you pointed out in your book, in November of 1861, there was an outbreak of bridge burning in eastern Tennessee, where Union loyalists were burning railroad bridges to try to cut Confederate transportation. So this fits in with that notion that you can sever the railroad lines by destroying the bridges.
Right, and there was some success in doing that really shut down rail traffic for a few days in November of 1861. And the facility with which Union forces could quickly repair, Confederates could repair their railroads. Both armies got better at it as the war went on, but railroad management and logistics and repair were still coming along in the early days of the war. So it was a sensible idea on paper, and it just didn't really work out in the realities of how things went.
Now, Andrews shows up, as you say, at Mitchell's tent and says, I've got a great idea. Mitchell says, okay, go ahead. Take a couple dozen guys with you. Who does Andrews choose, or how does are these the best and the brightest? Is there a competition? Do they draw straws? How does he get his force?
Well, they're volunteers taken from 3 Ohio regiments, the 2nd, 21st, and 33rd Ohio. And as you read and research and sort of learn how the procedure went, it really seems, in a sense, that they were more volunteered than they were actual volunteers. So colonels across the various regiments were asked to offer up volunteers for this raid. And interestingly, many of these men turn out to be at least somewhat ne'er-do-wells. There are some troublemakers, some men who drink, a sort of a scrawny school teacher type who's known for talking his companions almost to death. Now, by saying that, I don't mean to minimize their valor going forward. Certainly, they all served bravely and boldly in this raid. But there does seem to be a bit of a sort of dirty 24 appearance to this group once it's all cobbled together.
It actually reminded me of the Devil's Brigade, if you remember that World War II movie,
right,
in which there's a Canadian and an American battalion are going to be joined for some commando action, and they call for volunteers. The Canadians send their best, strongest volunteers. The American officers all use the opportunity to cull their units of their worst guys,
right,
send those off, and so you get the culture clash of the. And I kind of thought of that reading about these guys, that they really were, as you say, the cast-offs in some cases.
Yeah, it does sort of evoke the sort of World War II raid behind enemy lines movies that we grew up with.
It does, which is something that was not part of Civil War culture in the same way. We're going to take a short break and come back and talk about how this fits into the whole culture of fighting in the Civil War. And we'll also, for those who haven't read the story recently, talk about what actually happened when the raid gets started. We'll do all that when we get back in just a moment on Civil War Talk Radio.